Hi, everyone. My name is Teresa Carr. I'm a board certified behavior analyst here at Professional Therapy Associates. And today we have student analysts presenting on differential reinforcement.
Hi, my name is Courtney Hendricks. I'm one of the student analysts at Professional Therapy Associates, and I'm going to be talking about differential reinforcement. So the different types of differential reinforcement are differential reinforcement of alternative behavior, differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior, differential reinforcement of other behavior, differential reinforcement of low rates, and differential reinforcement of high rates. In ABA, differential reinforcement is a way to teach desired behaviors and reduce problem behaviors by giving rewards like reinforcement or praise only for the behaviors that we want to see and putting a problem behavior on extinction. We focus on changing behavior by understanding why a behavior happens, like its function, and then using strategies like reinforcement to teach new and helpful behaviors. When we target a problem behavior to reduce, a functionally similar replacement behavior should be taught. Differential reinforcement can be used to increase desired behaviors, decrease undesired behaviors, to develop functionally or socially acceptable replacement behaviors, teach complex skills by reinforcing successive approximations towards a goal, and maintaining a desired behavior after behavior change. To implement differential reinforcement effectively, we can identify the problem behavior that we want to decrease, select a functionally alternative behavior to increase, teach the alternative behavior, determine which differential reinforcement procedure is appropriate, use a powerful reinforcer, and reinforce desired behavior and withhold reinforcement for undesired behavior consistently. Differential reinforcement of alternative behavior is reinforcing an alternative behavior that serves the same or similar function as the problem behavior. So some examples of this would be tantruming for attention. We can alternate that to asking for help. The problem behavior would be a child engaging in tantrums to get attention. The alternative behavior can be the student raising their hand or using a help card. And then reinforcement would be the teacher or parent responding immediately to the raised hand or help card with attention. Another example would be hitting for a toy. We can alternate that to using words to request. The problem behavior is a child hitting a peer to get toys. The alternative behavior is the child asking, "Can I have a turn?" And reinforcement is the teacher or parent prompting the peer to share or praise and support their request. And then these are some examples in the home. So like grabbing a toy from a sibling or peer, we can alternate that into asking for a turn. Problem behavior would be taking toys out of a sibling or peer's hand. The alternative behavior would be asking, "Can I have a turn?" And then reinforcement is reinforced immediately when the child asks for their turn. Do not give them access to the toy if they just take it. Another example would be running around during dinner or sitting during a meal. Problem behavior is getting up and running around during dinner. Alternative behavior would be sitting nicely at the table. And then reinforcement would be offering a preferred item, praise, or a dessert only if they're sitting appropriately.
Hi, I'm Ara Stapleton. I'm a student analyst at PTA. Next, we're going to move on to differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior, or DRI. You can reinforce a behavior that physically cannot happen at the same time as the problem behavior. So these are some examples of DRI. So an example would be climbing on furniture, and the alternative would be sitting in a chair. So the problem behavior is a child climbing on furniture, and then the incompatible behavior is sitting in a chair. And then you would reinforce by giving access to a favorite activity for staying seated. Another example would be throwing items, and then the incompatible behavior would be hands on desk. The problem behavior, a child is throwing items. The incompatible behavior, keeping hands on desk. And the reinforcement would be offering praise or stickers for keeping hands on the table. Another example is interrupting, and the incompatible behavior would be waiting with a quiet mouth. Problem behavior would be interrupting while others are talking, and the incompatible behavior would be sitting quietly or waiting for their turn. And the reinforcement would be praised when they wait without interrupting. And our last example hitting, and then the incompatible behavior would be hands in pocket. The problem behavior, hitting or grabbing others. The incompatible behavior, keeping hands in pockets or on their laps. And the reinforcement would be praise, stickers, or a preferred activity when they keep hands to themselves. Moving on to differential reinforcement of other behavior, you reinforce the absence of the problem behavior. Any other behavior is okay as long as the problem one does not occur. And some examples, an example would be tantruming. The other behavior would be independently greeting. So the problem behavior, child tantrums due to restricted access. The other behavior, the child independently greets a peer by saying hello. And reinforcement, the parent or teacher says to the child, "Great job saying hello to your friend." Another example would be elopement, and the other behavior would be sitting independently. Problem behavior, a child runs away from parent in a grocery store. Other behavior, child successfully sits in their chair independently. And reinforcement would be parent or teacher says to child, "Awesome job sitting in your seat." Another example for DRO would be tantrums during homework, the problem behavior, tantrums while doing schoolwork. The other behavior, doing homework for 15 minutes without a tantrum. And the reinforcement would be if a child works for 15 minutes with no tantrum, they earn a break, small treat, or their favorite activity. Another example, hitting during playtime. The problem behavior would be hitting siblings during playtime. The other behavior, plays with siblings without hitting. And reinforcement, every 5 minutes that your child plays without hitting, give them a sticker or praise.
Hi, I'm Nichole Adams, and I'm a student analyst at PTA. And I'm going to start by talking about differential reinforcement of low rates, or DRL. So DRL is when you reinforce the behavior that happens less often. And it's okay because it happens in small amounts because it needs to be reduced. So our first example is if a student raises their hand too much in class in a school setting, you would reinforce them when they do it less than 3 times per lesson. So for low rates, we want to reduce the behavior, but we don't want to eliminate it. Another example is that we taught a child to initiate conversation with a peer, but now they're talking too much during class. We want to reinforce this behavior at a lower rate where we still want to see the behavior occurring, but just at a reduced level. Another example is if a child is demanding attention or asking for something too frequently, we can reinforce this when a child asks for attention no more than 2 times within 20 minutes. Another example is if a child appears to be frequently getting up from the dinner table during meals, we can reinforce when the child stays seated for 15 minutes without getting up. Our next one is differential reinforcement of high rates, or DRH. This is where you reinforce more of a desired behavior to encourage it to happen more often. Our first example would be lack of participation. So if the student in a classroom is not raising their hand enough during class, we can reinforce when the student raises their hand a minimum of 3 times during class. The reinforcement could be the student being assigned a class job or some kind of preferred item or reinforcement once the hand is raised 3 times. Another example is if the child lacks communication, and this child is engaging in behavior such as tantrums to obtain items, we can reinforce when the child asks for an item 10 times throughout the day. So other examples, more life skills based, would be independent dressing. If the child rarely dresses themselves independently in the morning, we can reinforce the child when they dress themselves 3 or more times per week. This can be done by the child earning tokens to earn a preferred item at the end of the week. Another example would be making the bed. The problem behavior is that the child rarely makes their bed independently in the morning. The child can be reinforced when they make their bed independently 4 or more days out of the week. And reinforcement could be if the child can earn a reward at the end of the week for meeting the criteria. So in conclusion, differential reinforcement involves providing reinforcement for desired behaviors and placing undesired behaviors on extinction. The types of differential reinforcement include DRA, DRI, DRO, DRL, and DRH. Differential reinforcement can be used in many different settings, including the school, the home setting, and the community settings. Some examples include increasing functional communication, increasing appropriate transitions, decreasing elopement, and decreasing tantrums. And some tips for success when using differential reinforcement. Be patient. Differential reinforcement is a teaching strategy, not a quick fix for behavior. Keep goals achievable. Start with goals that your child can reach so they can feel success. Track your progress. Use a chart, a tally, or a checklist to see how often the behavior is happening and to be able to see the progress. Fade the reinforcement gradually. Once the desired behavior is occurring, we can start to slowly space out the rewards. And be consistent. Always reinforce the desired behavior immediately and try not to accidentally reinforce the problem behavior.
All right. Thank you, Nichole, Mara, and Courtney for presenting the parent training series on differential reinforcement. Differential reinforcement can be a little bit confusing, and they can tie together a little bit. So if you guys do have any questions regarding differential reinforcement, please reach out to your BCBA. Thank you and have a good night.